Welcome to our Bunny Oberlander Memorial Lecture. Bunny's yahrzeit, it's Roberta Bunny Oberlander. Her yahrzeit is the 16th of Teves, which is this coming Thursday. This lecture has been graciously sponsored by her husband, Mark. May he live good long years, and may this evening's lecture be a merit for her and for her family, for her children and grandchildren. I am ecstatic to be able to introduce this evening Rabbi David Fohrman, who I once had a conversation with some nephews. I have a lot of nephews who are young yeshiva men, and they're studying, and they were telling me over something in the name of somebody. And I felt the need to tell them at that moment. I said, I know this person is a very important person who you're telling me this in the name of. I know he's a well-known person, and his books are well read. In 100 years, I'm not sure if his books are going to be read, but Rabbi Fohrman's books are going to be read. And if they're not read, it's only because everybody will already know what he taught. I've had the honor of being a teacher's assistant to Rabbi Fohrman, because for years I've been teaching several classes where his videos are the main source of instruction. And then afterwards, as a kind of teacher's assistant, I get to talk with the class members as we try to absorb the Rabbi Fohrman's lessons. I can't tell you how much it's meant to me and to my students, many of whom are watching this, to be able to have this opportunity and then to be able to have Rabbi Fohrman give us this opportunity live and speaking to us directly. I'm very, very grateful. I also want to confer mine and all of our condolences to Rabbi Fohrman on the loss of his brother almost 2 weeks ago. And he should find comfort. And again, we're very grateful, very, very grateful. So without any further ado, Rabbi Fohrman.
Okay, good. And Rabbi Karsh, it strikes me now, first of all, thanks for the gracious introduction. I really appreciate that. And it strikes me that maybe we can try something which we hadn't yet discussed, just sort of ad hoc and ad lib over here. But typically when I talk, as you know, I kind of talk Socratically, and it helps me to interact with folks. And I don't have the benefit of seeing all of your audience and interact with them, but I have you. So maybe we can structure this lecture less as a lecture and more as a conversation. If I can kind of share with you these thoughts kind of in conversation, and feel free to jump in or give me your reactions. It'll help me in bringing this across. Does that work for you?
My eyes go large, like saucers.
Okay. All right, good.
Okay, that's the reaction. Okay.
All right, you're cool with that?
If it helps you in any way, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, good. So let's do that. Okay. Great. So the subject of tonight's talk, what we're going to do, you and I talked about talking through, doing a lot of different subjects, and I've been thinking about a lot of different things. But one of the things I've been thinking about over the last 12 years, 13 years or so, is the ideas that I began to surface in the first book that I wrote, The Beast That Crouches at the Door, which was a treatment of the Adam and Eve and the Cain and Abel stories. One of the troubles with writing a book, Rabbi Karsh, is that a book is inherently static and thought is inherently dynamic. You never stop thinking about something, and yet what you put down in writing on the printed page can't be altered. So it's actually freezing your thinking unnaturally at a certain moment in time. Thinking isn't really meant to be captured at a certain moment in time, really. It's just a dynamic process, kind of like a wave. And you can, same way you can take a photograph of a wave at a certain point, right? But you never actually see that with your eye. You see something in motion. You don't see that crest of a wave. So I've been thinking about the ideas in The Beast That Crouches at the Door for the past 13 years since I wrote the book. And tonight's lecture, tonight's discussion is an attempt to update you on my thinking since I published that book. One of the great regrets sometimes of a writer is that what they wrote, they can't take back, and their thinking evolves. So here's a chance for me to give you kind of evolution of my thinking over the last few years, 13 years, about those thoughts. I want to kind of recount it to you. And I think I want to recount it to you almost as a wave, right? As kind of a chronological development of where I was at, in 2007, where I'm at now, and the process that kind of got me there. And so as you said, without any further ado, let me jump in and begin that process. I'm going to more or less assume that your audience has either read The Beast that Crouches at the Door, or that you'll suffice with the little tidbits from The Beast that Crouches at the Door that I'll give you here. For those of you who are interested, you can buy the book on Amazon and you can hear the backstory to this conversation. But hopefully this conversation will be meaningful to you, even if you hadn't read the book. So here's the thing. There were a few questions which I talked about in the book. I talked about a number of the questions in the book. I want to reprise a few of those questions. And I also want to talk to you about a number of questions which didn't make it into the book, which I think are significant to understanding the story, which have been haunting me since I wrote the book. One question which I didn't talk about in the book is this. There's this sort of magical tree in the garden. It's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? This very mysterious tree. And one sort of interesting question you can ask is, how does the tree of knowledge of good and evil get to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Right? It's kind of an origin story for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Does that tree have an origin story? Right? Like how did it get to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil? How did it come to possess this amazing power, whatever this knowledge of good and evil, that's embedded in the tree? In other words, was it just as simple as, well, God is the Almighty God, and he decided in his infinite wisdom with a puff of orange smoke to convey upon this tree the ability to confer this magical power of giving good knowledge of good and evil to people? Or was it not magical? Was there some process by which it became the tree, almost a rational process by which it became the tree, a process that you and I could actually understand? And it may be that there's no answer to that question that we can know, but it's an interesting thought experiment kind of question to ask. Is there an origin story for the tree of knowledge of good and evil? How did the tree of knowledge get to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil? So that's question number one, which I didn't talk about in the book. A question which I did talk about in the book that I want to reprise is this. Is two questions, and they have to do with the role of nakedness in the story. If you and I were writing this story, one of the points I made in The Beast that Crouches at the Door is that the consequences from eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil seem to be somewhat counterintuitive. You would imagine if you're going to have a tree that's called a tree of knowledge of good and evil, if people eat from it, the consequences would be their eyes would be opened and they'd understand good and evil, right? Their eyes would be filled with these moral dilemmas. They'd start thinking about things in terms of morality, in terms of good, in terms of evil. They'd be wondering about lifeboat questions. 10 people in a lifeboat, the boat is sinking. Unless you throw 2 people off, you're all going to die. What should you do? Right? These moral dilemmas, right to life versus right to choice. They'd be struggling with these questions. And yet that's not the consequence of eating from the tree. The consequence of eating from the tree is that they eat from the tree and their sense of nakedness changes. Their sense of their own body changes. Their sense of their own nakedness changes. Why is that? And it changes in a strange way, actually. You would assume that because the text says that leading into the story, and Adam and his wife, they were naked and they were not ashamed, that if that was going to change as a result of eating from the tree, they would be naked and they would be ashamed. But what's strange is once they eat from the tree, that's actually not what the text says. If you go back to the text says when God famously questions Adam and says, "So I see that you're hiding. Why are you hiding?" He says, uh, he says, "Va'ira ki aroma nochi v'achaveh." I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid. Which is interesting because that's not what he's supposed to say, right? He's supposed to say, "I was ashamed because I was naked, and therefore I hid." And instead, he gets this idea that he's fearful. So the kind of two questions wrapped into one. First of all, why is a new way of relating to nakedness at all an issue for eating from a tree of good and evil? It just seems to have nothing to do with eating from, if the input is eating from a tree of knowledge of good and evil, you would never in a million years imagine that the output would be relating to your own nakedness differently. And if it would be, you would assume, well, I wasn't ashamed before, I'm going to be ashamed now, but instead I'm fearful. So what's the relationship between fear and shame, and why both of these, and how exactly does that work, right? So that's another question which I'm kind of interested in. While we're on the topic, another issue which I raised in The Beast That Crouches at the Door is that the word for nakedness is kind of interesting in Hebrew. The word is arom, right? And the word aroma, of course, also shows up in the same story meaning something else. The snake is described as arom. The snake is described as crafty. And so we have this meaning of crafty and this meaning of naked. And how do those two meanings interplay with one another? Now, in The Beast That Crouches at the Door, I had a theory about that, which has kind of evolved in the years since. But the theory back then, I said, is that, well, nakedness and being crafty are actually sort of opposites of each other, right? To the extent that I'm crafty, I'm hiding my true intentions. It's like I'm cloaking what's really going on. And therefore, nakedness is the very opposite of that, right? So at some level, is the snake really, if we would say the snake is crafty, but maybe there's a sense in which he's just naked, in which maybe he's very above board and just showing you what it's like to be a snake and just telling you the truth about things from his perspective. And that was my theory there. But I'm interested in revisiting this question, which is, what's the relationship between these two meanings of arom, sly on the other hand, and naked on the other? What are other ways of understanding the relationship of being sly or crafty, or being tricky and being naked? So how is it that we understand those connections? So these are some of the questions which I sort of want to revisit. And those two questions I talked about a little bit in the book. But for the last question, I think the last question or two that I want to talk about are some questions which I didn't talk about in the book, and perhaps some of the most basic questions of all that you could ask about the story. Why did I not ask these questions in the book if they were so basic? The honest answer, Rabbi Karsh, is I didn't really have an answer to them. And therefore, I just ignored them, right? What are you going to do? You have a question, you don't have an answer, right? You're just going to say, here's this question, I don't have a good answer for it, right? Or maybe I thought I had a good answer, but it didn't seem so profound. I don't know, but I'm just going to throw the question out there for full disclosure. What's the most basic question you can ask about the entire story? And strangely, by the way, this is a question that people would ask me, right? Like students would ask me in the class, and I would get kind of annoyed. Why are you asking this question? I would give like kind of canned answer. And frankly, I think I was annoyed because I didn't have a really great answer for this question. So it just felt annoying. But so I'll tell you the question. The most basic question you can ask about the story sounds a little cynical. If God really didn't want people to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't you think he shouldn't have put the tree there in the first place? What would you say to that question, right? I mean, as a teacher, it's like an annoying question to get asked. Like, you're telling me God really didn't want us to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So why do you put the tree there? Why do you put the tree there? Just so what? So you could play gotcha? Like, what's that about, right? Now, typically, whenever I would get asked this question 14, 15 years ago, I would say, well, I would put on my theologian hat and I would say, well, you don't understand. There needs to be, in order for free will to operate, there must be a choice, right? And so God had to give people a choice. right? And to choose to do the right thing or to choose to do the wrong thing. So he put this tree to see whether they would do the right thing or do the wrong thing. And without that, humanity wouldn't have any choices, and therefore they would have no way of earning reward, right? Okay. But Rabbi Karsh, let me just ask you, like, honestly, group therapy session here, right? You and I probably have been teaching long enough. We've probably both given this answer, right, at various moments in our lives. At least I know I have, right? But if you're going to be a skeptical student, put on your skeptical student hat. Like, honestly, how convincing does that answer really feel? Like, if you're really a skeptical student, what would you say to me if I piously put on my theologian hat? And I said, no, you don't understand. There have to be these choices. And so God had to engineer this choice in the garden. So he had to create this choice that we would have in which we could possibly disobey him, right? Would that completely satisfy you? Or could you imagine a bright and rather cynical student coming up with a rejoinder to that question? What would it be?
Well, right off, as I'm thinking about it, my first thought is, it seems to me like if you're even letting me know about it, because I don't know a lot about God's private world.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me like if you're letting me know about it, there's some kind of invitation to me to be involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you're all knowing and all powerful, and it seems to me at at most maybe some kind of test, like personal test, that you're trying to see what I'm going to do, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But if he really didn't want me to do it, there's just no way I would do it. I don't know the rest of his personal. There's no way I could do other things to God that he. I mean, we would assume.
The fact that I even could do it suggests that on some level maybe God would want me to do it,
or at least be open. I mean, he doesn't maybe want me to do it, but it wouldn't be the end of the world if I did it. Or maybe he's curious what I'm going to do when he tells me not to do it, because why is he telling me this?
Good. And now let me push you a little bit more. And what's your problem, would you say, with a universe in which God, the only reason why God creates this tree, right, is to test me as to whether or not I'll do what he wants? To me, that just feels mean, right? Like, that's not so nice. Like, what would you do that to your kid? Like, what would you think of a parent who, like, puts this great chocolate chip cookie in the middle of the kitchen table and says, I'm going to be walking out now, and there's this kitchen, this chocolate chip cookie right in the middle of the kitchen table, and you can, have whatever you want, but, like, don't eat the chocolate chip cookie, right? Because I want to test you to see whether you'll really eat it or not. And then the kid eats the chocolate chip cookie, and the parent's, like, really mad and banishes you from the house because you ate the chocolate chip cookie. It's like, you'd say, like, look, can we talk about parenting a little bit? Like, maybe I could give you a few sessions on parenting, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't seem so nice. It's not, you don't test your kids like that. Like, it's strange, the test theory. It sounds capricious almost. It's like, God, come on, you're all knowing, you know what I'm about. We need to go through this exercise. Like, it's just an odd thing. So why would God put that tree in the garden if he really didn't want me to eat from it? And now I'm also interested in the other answer which you gave, in which you were kind of playing with the notion that, I don't know, if God put the tree in the garden, even if he's telling me not to eat from it, it kind of feels to me like there's a little bit of an invitation to maybe eat from the tree, right? And now, but the problem with that is that even though that sounds kind of right, that also leads to a very difficult way to read the story, right? Because at face value, now I would tell you the story's kind of messed up, because the story goes like this. God, on some level, really wants us to eat from this tree, maybe, let's say. But he hides behind this veil of righteous anger and says, there's this tree, I really don't want you to eat from it, but I sort of know that if I put it off limits, you're going to kind of test it. I'm sort of okay with you having it. I just don't want to say I'm okay with you having it, right? But then you eat from it, and I say, what did you do? right? I say, well, I ate from the tree. And it's like, well, I told you not to eat from the tree. You're banished from Eden. You're gonna have to work for your food, right? Pain and childbirth, suffering all around, right? And then the great original sin, and I feel so terrible. It's like, and meanwhile, God is kind of rubbing his hands in glee. He finally ate from the tree, just like I wanted him to do. Like, that's really weird, right? Like, how would we understand that? How do we play with these notions? Like, so this question of why would God put this tree that he doesn't want us to eat from is a very vexing, very problematic question. And the simple answer, it was a test, doesn't feel fully like it's the whole story, right? This is my last question. Why would God put the tree in the garden if he really didn't want us to eat from it, right? So these are the questions, right? Just to kind of review, how does the tree of knowledge of good and evil get to be the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Is it just a puff of orange smoke? Is there an origin story for the tree? How do we understand this whole nakedness thing, right? Why is nakedness the consequence of eating from the tree of good and evil? Why does it sound like I'm going to be embarrassed if I eat from the tree, but I end up fearful if I eat from the tree? What's the relationship between fear and shame? How does aram, the two meanings of the word aram, which means to be naked, but also to be tricky, how do those two things relate to each other? And finally, why put the tree in the garden if you really don't want me to eat from the tree, right? These are the things I've been haunted with, right, since I wrote that book. Some questions I dealt with in the book, others, like this last one, I didn't. And that's kind of led me on a journey that has three main steps on it. And let me take you to step one of that journey. Step one of that journey, you can find an Aleph Beta. Aleph Beta is my website where I've got lots of videos and stuff like that. And this first showed up about 5 years ago or so in a video series we did for Purim. I think it's entitled Esther, Haman, and the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. And this represented the first major shift kind of in my thinking since I'd written The Beast That Crouches at the Door about the story of the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. I'm not going to get into how that relates to the whole story of the Megillah. You can watch the video for that. But here is the essence of kind of where I went through there. And this is kind of stage one. So stage one kind of begins with the following insight. The command that gets a lot of press in the story of the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil is the command not to eat from the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil. But you and I both know that that wasn't the only command connected with trees that Adam and Eve got. As a matter of fact, the very same verse that puts forth a prohibition against eating from the Tree of Knowledge of Good and Evil also contains another command, and it's not a prohibitive command. It's actually a positive imperative. Let's take a look at that verse for a second. I don't even know if I need to share the screen with you because it's just a simple verse. I'm just going to read it to you. The verse says, God says, here we go. That's actually two verses. Vayitzav Hashem Elokim el Adam, right? And God commanded man, saying, and right, Mikol etzagan achol tochel. From all the trees of the garden you shall eat, yes, eat. Ume'etz hadat tov v'ra lo tochal mimenu. But from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat from it. Ki b'yom ha'chal mimenu mot tamut. Because on the day that you eat from it, you'll surely die. So you see that there's actually two commands wrapped in one. There's a positive command that goes along with this negative command. The positive command is to eat from all the other trees. It doesn't sound like that's just something you can do. It sounds like something you shall do, because listen to how the verse puts it. Vayitzav Hashem Elokim ala Adam lemor mikol etzagan achol tochel. And God commanded man, saying, from all the trees you shall eat achol tochel. Achol tochel, that doubled verb, indicates an imperative, like mot yumat, you shall surely die. Achol tochel, you shall surely eat, right? It's saying that this is what I demand of you. I want you to eat from all these other trees. So there are these two commands. Eat from all these other trees. But don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, what's interesting also is right before this, the Torah had told us something about these other trees. Now, of course, there's two stories of creation, right? There's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. and they tell the story from different angles. But we're in Genesis 2 right now. So let me read you how the other trees, these trees that man is commanded to eat, are described in Genesis 2, just a couple verses before this command. God says, Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim min hadama, and God caused to sprout from the ground, kol eitz nechmad lemar'eh, v'tov lema'achal, v'yitzachayim b'toch hagan, v'yitzadat tov v'ra. And God caused to sprout from the ground all trees that were a delight to the eye, and that were delicious to eat, along with the tree of life, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, just by way of contrast, in Genesis 1, which is an entirely different view of the story, none of these adjectives are attached to these trees. The trees are just trees. God creates all these trees, liminehem, each according to their kind. That's all we know about the trees. But suddenly in chapter 2, we hear something else about these trees. We hear these descriptors of these trees. They are tov lema'achal. They are nechmad lemareh. They're beautiful to look at. They're delicious to eat. So if you put 2 and 2 together, you say, okay, so God creates all these trees. They're delicious to eat. They're beautiful to look at. And then he says, I'm commanding you to eat all of them. Rabbi Karsh, what do you take out of that, right? It's not just that God is saying, I want you to stay away from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The overall sense of things, right, is how do you make sense of this first part of the command? What seems to be the motivation of God of saying, eat from all these trees? What would you say?
Well, he's certainly not only encouraging us to do it, but he's giving us every incentive to eat from those trees.
And now if I asked you, if you would have to conjecture why, what's in the head of the divine being, right, that he's doing that, why would he do that, right? If you could ascribe a motivation, what do you think, what would it be?
So you're asking,
I mean, this is
what is the motivation
right?
to ask me to eat from the other trees? Mm-hmm. What is his motivation? Well, he wants me to benefit from the world he's created.
Exactly. He wants me to benefit from the world he's created, right? Yeah. It is, in a word, a gift of love, right? Yeah. I love you guys. There's these wonderful trees. You're going to love them. They're delicious. They're beautiful to look at. I made them just for you, right? Yeah. It's like, right? It's not a coincidence that oranges taste good, that apricots taste good. Even if you think now, candy, right? Laffy Taffies are just artificial recreations of fruit flavors. Fruity Pebbles, right? All the sugar series in the story is just an artificial attempt to come close to what the fruit actually tastes like. The fruit is God's candy, right? I mean, it's like we order from Costco these days on Instacart in the pandemic, you know, and we get these delicious little cups of pomegranate seeds. And it's like, I'm eating these things and they're delicious. They're ruby red. And they're thinking like, oh man, you couldn't make this up in a lab if you had to. This is like God's candy. That's what it is. It's literally candy. So God says, I love you guys. I'm giving you all this delicious food. Now, how do we make sense of the fact that that gets coupled with this restriction not to eat of this one tree, this tree of knowledge, good and evil? How do we understand the connection between those two ideas? So for that, I'd like to actually play a little thought experiment with you, play a little game with you. And we're going to call it Grandpa Bobby and the Battleship. All right. And here's the way the game goes. Right. All right. You are Grandpa. Right. And one day you were going to visit your grandchild, Bobby. Right. Bobby lives in St. Louis or somewhere else. Right. And you go and you're making this trip to St. Louis and you're visiting Bobby, your 6-year-old grandchild. And you love Bobby. And so you figure you're going to get him this really wonderful Lego battleship. So you go to Target, you buy this wonderful Lego battleship. You come and everyone's really happy to see you. And you see Bobby and you say, Bobby, right, I've got this gift for you. And you hand him the Lego battleship. Okay, let's freeze that moment in time. What response would you like to see from Bobby, either now or over the course of the next few days, right? What would you like to see from Bobby? You went and you bought this battleship. You're giving him this battleship. What do you want to see?
I want to see him enjoying it.
You want to see him enjoying it, right? You want to see him enjoying it? I want to see Bobby. It gives me great joy to see Bobby assemble that battleship, play with the battleship, right? It's really great. Anything else? Is there anything else you would want aside from seeing Bobby play with the battleship, right?
Well, I guess thank you.
Thank you would be nice, right? A little thanks, I just thank you, right? Now,
As a grandparent, we don't really expect thank yous, but yes.
right, exactly. Yeah, you might like a thank you. Now, what if I pressed you on that, Rabbi Karsh? Right?
Yes.
What if somebody was ribbing you and said, Rabbi Karsh, like, really, do you have to be so invested? You have to be so curmudgeonly that you need this thank you? Is it really about your ego that you need to be thanked by the 6-year-old? Right? You might say that, you know what, it's not really even about my ego, right? It's not like grandpa needs the thank you from a 6-year-old, right? I love you, right? It's more that without the thank you, right, there's a problem. Let's just kind of play it out so we understand, what does this scene look like without the thank you? And what does the scene look like without Bobby playing with the battleship, right? So without the thank you, in other words, let's imagine that Bobby plays with the battleship. He's really excited with the battleship, but he never says thank you. He never, in fact, even makes eye contact with you for the next week that you're there, right? He's just like into his battleship and playing with his friends, and it basically ignores you, right? Over the rest of the course of your trip, you start feeling kind of bad, right? And so therefore, the reason why you sort of want the thank you, it's not because you need the thank you. You just want him, when he's playing with the battleship, to have the consciousness that it was a gift from you, right? In other words, because it's a relationship builder, right? So I just need him to understand, when he says thank you, it's his way of understanding that his room didn't come with battleships. Do you know what I mean? That he can't take for granted that there's this battleship in his life and just forget where the battleship came from, right? That's not why you gave it to him. You gave it to him, you should understand, Grandpa loves you. He gave you this gift, right? That's what thank you does. It embeds in Bobby the consciousness when he's playing in the battleship, this came from Grandpa, right? And so the thank you is actually important to you. Conversely, it's also important to you that Bobby enjoy the battleship, right? You don't want Bobby to say, oh, Grandpa, thank you so much. It was such a great battleship. Put it up on the shelf, right? And then never look at it for the next week and then like ignore it. It's like, I want nachas. I want to see you playing with the battleship. I want to get that sense of enjoyment. It's like really important for you as a gift of love that you should give something that your kids really enjoy. You just want them to enjoy it, understanding that it came from you. Right? That's really it. Okay, so now that we think of that, that actually provides us a model for understanding how these two commands interact with each other that God gives, the positive command and the negative command. The positive command to eat from all the trees, and the negative command to stay away from one of them. Here's how they interact. God comes up with an ingenious answer to the grandpa problem. And the answer isn't thank you. It's something else. He doesn't need thank you. It's not really about the thank you. It's just about having the kid have the consciousness that this is a gift for grandpa, not taking it for granted, not thinking that, giving into the concept that my room comes with battleships, right? Because think about it, grandpa's going to go back to Chicago, to Northbrook, kid's going to be in St. Louis. You're not going to be seen, right? You're not going to be in his life all the time. You're invisible grandpa. It's very easy, if there's invisible grandpa, for Bobby to just start thinking his room just came with a battleship and forget about this. So the thank you helps him understand, no, this really came from invisible grandpa. Well, God is the ultimate invisible grandpa, right? You can't touch him, you can't feel him, easy to forget about him. So God doesn't really want to be invisible grandpa that's so easy to forget, right? So God wants Adam and Eve to really enjoy all these trees, but he doesn't want them to succumb to the temptation that their room just came with all these trees, right? That's just the way the world is, right? Because love means that I want you to understand that this was a gift from me, because that's a relationship builder. How do I do that? I don't even ask for a thank you from you. You don't even have to say thank you. All you have to do is, stay away from the one tree that I told you not to eat from. Because if you eat from all those wonderful trees, and I just pick a tree, any tree, and I say, that's my tree, right? That's like a godly tree. It's got special powers, right? Stay away from that one over there. And I do it. What does that show? It shows that I don't think this is my room, right? I don't think that all these trees are mine to do whatever I want with. I don't own the refrigerator around here. I understand these are gifts. They're given with certain provisions, right? I'm abiding by those provisions. The fact that I'm abiding those provisions shows that I don't think it's mine to do whatever I want with. I got this as a gift. I'm listening out of courtesy to the gift giver. I'm staying. So as long as I stay away from that one tree, even as I eat the others, I'm partaking in that gift the way that God wants me to partake of it, with the consciousness that it came from God. And the gift is real. And it's all about love, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of what occurred to me, back about 5 years ago. This is a nice way of thinking about how these trees interact with each other. Okay, but now let's push that theory a little bit farther. If I'm a skeptic, I might object to that theory, that way of understanding how these commands interact with each other, on the following grounds. I might say, well, Fohrman, that's very interesting. Your idea about Bobby and Grandpa and the battleship and love and all of that. I kind of get that. It's sort of nice. Here's the problem. If that were the only thing that was going on here, it wouldn't make a difference what tree God chose to keep me away from. It's any tree. It's just random. The tree could have any qualities. God could have said, you know what, Adam and Eve, stay away from the pink spotted and speckled tree, right? Stay away from that tree. That's my special tree. Why, of all things, does it have to be a tree of knowledge of good and evil? What does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Why is it called a tree of knowledge of good and evil? Okay, and here we get to the second landmark of the theory, right? We're going to talk tonight about 3 stages of a theory. Bobby, Grandpa, and the battleship is stage 1. Stage 2 is what I'm about to describe here, the question of, okay, fine, but why is it a tree of knowledge of good and evil? Okay, and this represents a slight development of the theory a little bit step further. Why is it a tree of knowledge of good and evil? Now here we get to the vexing question of what in the world a tree of knowledge of good and evil means in the first place. What could that mean? Now, this was the central question I addressed in The Beast That Crouches at the Door. And in that book, I gave a very sort of sophisticated answer modeled around the Rambam, the Maimonides and the Moreh Nevuchim. And the Rambam makes this rather complicated understanding and argues that there's a post-tree world and a pre-tree world and a post-tree world, and morality looked like a certain thing in the pre-tree world and another thing in the post-tree world. It's a tree of that's true and false in one world, it's good and evil in the other. What's the transition between true and false, good and evil? The problem with that theory, as nice as it is it's very complicated, right? The question is, Occam's razor, can we simplify the theory at all? Right? Is there a way to simplify this theory? And I think there is. So here's a way to begin to simplify the theory. The problem, right? A problem with a theory that's that sophisticated is like, how are you ever supposed to know, right? Like if I'm a simple guy, I'm just reading the text, how am I ever supposed to stumble upon the Rambam's insight, right? I'm like, the Rambam can say it, but how is anybody supposed to actually know that that's true? So here's a way that like average Joe reading the Bible can understand what in the world a tree of knowledge of good and evil means. You would imagine your average reader gets to the tree and says, that's a pretty interesting. I've never seen a tree of good knowledge of good and evil before. Wonder what that tree is. So that's like you'd stop to think about it. Now, if you were an average reader of the Bible, where would you reach for an understanding of what these words mean? A tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, you're reading the Bible. This hits you in chapter 2. The simplest way that you would begin to understand what those words mean is not that you would sit there and philosophize, and you wouldn't go open up Plato's Republic and try to see what Plato had to say about good and evil, and you wouldn't wonder what Schopenhauer had to say about good and evil, right? Or Kant, or you wouldn't even consult the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim. All those are very sophisticated approaches, and the defect in all of those approaches is that they require you to go outside the Bible. Right? How am I supposed to know look and Kant? How am I supposed to know to look in Schopenhauer, right? I should be able to look in the Bible for the answers. The Bible itself should tell me the answers. So where does the Bible itself tell you what Tov and Ra means? Let's start with Tov. Has the word Tov ever appeared? The way you would figure out what these words mean is you'd look at how the Torah uses them. So you'd say, okay, I'm up to chapter 2. Have I ever encountered this word before? Tov, good. How has the Bible used the word? Forget Kant. What does God think the word means? So Rabbi Karsh, right? It's chapter 2 in Genesis. Where have we encountered the word Tov before chapter 2?
We have encountered it in the chapter 1 in almost every day of creation. It says, and God saw that it was good.
Absolutely. At almost every day of creation, it is the word that God uses to give his stamp of approval on creation. Vayar Elokim ki tov. And God saw that it was good, and God saw that it was good, and that God saw that it was good, right? Okay. Interestingly, if we think that's irrelevant, when Eve looks at the tree to eat from it, it says, Vatera ha'isha ki tov ha'etz lamachal. And the woman saw that the tree was good to eat, right? Now, those words actually sort of mimic what God was saying in chapter 1 in creation, Vayar Elokim ki tov. And God saw that it was good over and over again. It's almost like she's doing something godly there, very similar to whatever God was doing when God said that it was good. Okay. Now, that's the word tov, appears over and over again in creation. Now, interestingly, the word ra doesn't, right? We haven't really met the word ra yet, at least not in chapter 1, right? But there is no vayar Elokim ki ra. And God saw that it was bad, right? But Rabbi Karsh, if I would just ask you to conjecture for a moment, if there would ever have been a moment in creation that God saw that something was bad, what do you think he would do?
What would God do if he saw something was bad?
If he created something and saw that it was good, right? That's the world we have. What if God theoretically had created something and then saw it was bad?
Well, I might be thinking too much. But it does happen at some point in Noah where he says that he saw that the nature of man is bad from his youth, and then he compensated for that.
Well,
bad.
that's at the end of the story.
Right.
But what about the
Right.
beginning of the story where God saw us also?
Oh yeah, he destroyed. Yeah,
He destroyed the world.
he
It
destroyed.
turns out and Rabbi Karsh is absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It turns out there is a moment of Vayar Elokim ki ra. It just doesn't happen in creation. It happens 7 chapters later. It happens in the prologue to the flood. In the prologue to the flood, the text says, Vayar Elokim ki, and God saw, ki rabba ra'at ha'aretz vayit atzav elibo. He saw how great was the evil of man in the world. But the formulation is very similar to Vayar Elokim ki tov. It's just the flip side of that. Vayar Elokim ki ra. Vayar Elokim ki rabba ra'at adam. And what did God decide to do when Vayar Elokim ki rabba ra'at adam?
He destroyed it,
He
or
destroyed
wiped
it.
it out, started over. Yeah.
Which suggests that the converse, Vayar Elokim ki tov, is God deciding what? I just created something.
Yeah, it's good. And he would, I imagine, want to give more.
Yeah,
Or,
I'll keep it around, right?
Yeah.
In other words, let me put it to you this way. If you think about God's creative process, at least as described in Genesis chapter 1, the creative process basically has 3 stages. And the stages sort of correspond to a past, present, and future, right? The sort of past stage is that God, before he creates something, kind of plans it out and says, let there be X, Y, and Z, right? And then God actually executes it. That's the present stage, right? God goes and does it. Vayas Elokim et araki. God goes and then creates the thing. And then after he creates it, the final stage, the future stage, or once it's done, God then goes and What does he do? Vayar Elokim ki tov, he evaluates it. It's evaluative, right? And he evaluates it and says, I think I'll keep it, right? Vayar Elokim ki tov. In that evaluative save, he also could say that it's bad. And if he would say it's bad, he'd just get rid of it. That's the nature of evaluation. And the reason why I evaluate, of course, why any creator would evaluate is because you don't want to bring bad things into the world. As a creator, I have a responsibility to make sure that that which I create is actually worth keeping. So I'm going to keep the things that are worth keeping. I'm going to get rid of the things that are worth getting rid of. That's the way things go. So you might almost think of the words tov and ra as they appear in chapter 1 as words of judgment, right? As words of judgment, of evaluation, which are sort of godly words of judgment. They're sacred. They're words the creator uses to describe whether he's going to keep something around. They're grades that he gives to creation, good, right, or bad, right? Am I going to get rid of it? Am I going to keep it, right? And they're right. They're just, and by the way, interestingly enough, God's names, of course, are different in chapter 1 and in chapter 2. And famously, God's name in chapter 1 is Elohim, a word which Chazal, which the sages associate with a certain characteristic. What characteristic do we associate with Elohim?
Judgment.
Judgment. Why? Where did the sages get that from? I would argue they got it from this. Because in Genesis chapter 1, God does something over and over again. He evaluates what he creates and he sees that it's good. And if it's not good, he's willing to get rid of it, right? It is God as judge that we meet in Genesis chapter 1. One might then argue that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is almost a tree of relating to God as a God of justice, as a God who judges things and says, this is good, this isn't good, right? I'm going to get rid of this, I'm going to keep that with this sort of, it confers maybe this ability to make these godly judgments about whether you like things the way they are, whether you're going to get rid of things, or whether you're going to keep them around. Interestingly, in Genesis chapter 2, we get introduced to another facet of God, not just God who's Elohim, the judge, but God who's Hashem Elohim. Hashem is a trait that we relate to as a trait of compassion, a trait of love. Judgment is almost the opposite of love, right? If you think about a man and wife who are in love, right? What's the one thing that leads to a marital fight, right? Say, I feel like you're judging me. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't want to be judged. That love almost seems anathema to judgment. And by the way, when things don't go well in world 2, which is to say the world of Genesis 2, there is a moment where something seems off, where God looks at something and says, this isn't quite right. Now, if this was Genesis 1, it would be Ron, he'd just get rid of it. It would be the opposite of Tov. But this is Genesis 2, the world in which God is not just judge, but he's also the one who loves you. Of course, the thing that God sees that's not quite right is man being alone. What does he say when he sees man, when man is alone? Does he say it's Ra?
Lo tov.
Lo tov.
Not good.
The most God says is, lo tov, needs improvement. The most the lover of man would say, I'm not going to say it's Ra, I'm not going to get rid of it. Lo tov means we can make this better. It's not yet tov, right? Let's make it better. We're not going to get rid of it. But that's a different way of seeing things. It's a subjective way of seeing it. It's like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this thing work, right? Tov and Ra are these very cut and dried ways. This is the way things should be. This is the way things shouldn't be. The prerogative of the creator to judge his creation. The responsibility, we might even say, of a creator to judge his creation. You don't want to bring bad things into the world. But it's not just the prerogative of the creator to judge his creation. It's not just the responsibility of the creator to judge his creation. It's one more thing. The creator has the unique capacity to judge his creation, has the unique ability to do so effectively, more so than creatures do. Why? What is there about being creator that allows you, right? It's like that gives you the right, that gives you the right. What gives you the right is, I'm the creator, I get to decide, I suppose, but that makes you an effective judge of whether things should be kept or whether things should be gotten rid of. And why are you a more effective judge than, say, a creature, right? Someone who is created. What's wrong with a creature being the judge of what should be and what shouldn't be in the world, of the way things should be? The difference between the creator and the creature is that the creator doesn't have any skin in the game. The creator is outside the system, and the creature is not. The creature is a player in the system. And if you're a player in the system, if you're inherently subjective, you see that dictatorial sort of justice view of things is inherently an objective perspective towards things. Looking at things cut and dried, I just need to know, should I keep it? Should I not keep it? What should be? You need a certain air of detachment to be able to make that judgment, right? Subjectivity is the enemy of your judgment when it comes to that, right? We all know that if I'm subjective, I'm not really such a good judge anymore, right? Because I'm hopelessly biased, right? We even call it bias, right? You're biased towards the one that you love. So as a creature, I'm inherently subjective. I am a subject in the world. I can't be trusted to make judgments about how the world should be. I live in the world. I have interests, right? I have an interest in the world. And this gets to sort of that argument I made. This is like a version of the argument I made in The Beast that Crouches at the Door. If you remember that chapter about the Suburban on the rainy night in Manhattan, right? Where, like, you park your car and you hit this Jaguar in back of you, and you start rationalizing, should I leave a note? No one really saw. You convince yourself that it's the right thing to do. The insurance company's going to pay anyway. I'm such a poor guy. Why do you leave it there? Maybe I didn't even make the dent. Maybe I just ran over the Coke can. It's Robin Hood. I'm going to steal from the rich. I'm going to give to the poor. You convince yourself that you're such a big tzaddik for not leaving the road, right? You completely change around, because what's happening, your subjectivity is playing with you. You don't realize that you have an interest in this decision of whether you're going to leave that note or not. It's not like you're the great creator who's outside the system, right? It's like, to give you an analogy, I sometimes give the analogy of Parker Brothers and the Monopoly game, right? So, if you're Parker, the guy who created the Monopoly game, you get to make the rules for Monopoly. If you're Little Hat and Little Shoe, you don't get to make the rules. It can't be that every time Little Hat rolls the dice, he gets to decide what the rules of Monopoly are, right? Little Hat rolls a 5 and a 2 and says, guess what the rules are now? The rules are, when you roll a 5 and a 2, you get to land in free parking and clean up and take all the money in free parking. This is, well, the Little Shoe says, well, I'm going to change the rules, right? You can't have that sort of argument about what the rules should be between these two people who are playing the game, because they're hopelessly subjective, and they may certainly see it that way, but they're never going to really see it the way it really is. They're going to see it through the rose-colored lens of their own interests. And so God wants to keep us away from this understanding of good and evil, understand that he's the one who decides good and evil. So this is this sort of the second stage in this theory. If Bobby and Grandpa on the battleship is stage one of our theory, and Bobby and Grandpa on the battleship says, okay, God loves you. This is a gift of love. He wants you to really enjoy all these trees. He just wants you to understand, not lose sight of the fact that you're a guest in the garden. So there's one tree that's off limits. But then you ask, well, what's the nature of that one tree? It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's not a tree that's good for you to have. You shouldn't be the one making these decisions about good and evil. You're a creature. It's not for you. It's for God. It's going to lead to all sorts of terrible things. Once you think you can make those decisions, that's going to be the root of all the evil in the world. Terrible things are going to come if you think, right? By the way, one of the really frustrating things about life is that there's no such thing as bad people anymore, because every bad person thinks that they're good, right? Because they think they're such a tzaddik, because Hitler thinks that he's doing the world a favor by getting rid of the Jews. He honestly thinks that's true, because in his twisted way of looking at it, that's what he's convinced himself. That's the nature of our subjectivity. Once you think that you get to make the rules, you never see yourself as evil anymore. Your subjectivity blindsides you. It's never obviously, or to everyone else, they can see you're subjective. But to you, you're blind. It's a lens through which you see things. You never realize it's there. So it's very dangerous for us human beings who are subjective to make these choices. Okay, now what I want to do is spend just a moment or two fusing these first two steps together. We've identified two steps. We'll call them our Bobby Grandpa on the battleship step, and our what does good and evil really mean step. Now I want to take those two steps and put them together and see what we have. How do we put them together? And here's what I want to suggest. When we put them together, we get an answer to one of the questions which I started with tonight. And that question is, how did the tree of knowledge of good and evil become the tree of knowledge of good and evil? What's the origin story for the tree of knowledge of good and evil? We now may have, we put these two theories together, we may have an answer to the origin story. It wasn't a puff of orange smoke. It's not that there's some magical quality to the tree. It's not that God in his infinite wisdom said poof and magically conferred this ability to understand morality that's in this tree. No, frankly, it's a tree like any other tree. It's a regular tree. There's nothing special about it. God picked a random tree in the garden and said, that's my tree, don't eat from it. Well, then why is he calling it the special tree with the tree of knowledge of good and evil? How does it become a tree of knowledge of good and evil? You know how it becomes a tree of knowledge of good and evil? When you reach for it in contravention to God's desires is when it actually becomes that tree. Think about it. What choice are you making? What's going through your head when God said, don't eat from that tree? But you're going to say, but you know what? That looks like a pretty good tree. I'm not going to eat from all those other trees. I'm just going to take from that one tree I can't have. I'm going to eat from that tree. Now, why are you doing that? What's the meaning of you doing that? God said, don't eat from it. Why are you doing that? What are you saying in effect? Yes, God, I know that you think that this is the way things should be, that human beings shouldn't eat from the tree. But I've got another think coming. I think that I should be allowed to eat from that tree. What's this business of having a tree that I can't eat from in this world? I think it'd be a very nice thing. I think we should, why can't I have that tree? I'd like to have that tree. I see things a little differently. I think it would be great for us to be able to have that tree. And that's Vatera Haisha Kitov. And the woman saw, she made this judgment, just as godly judgment, just like God thinks, here's how it should be, right? I'm going to keep it. She says, here's how it's going to be. I'm going to eat from the tree. It's good. It's not good and evil. It's good. Kitova it's the She leaves out the evil part. She says, here's how I see it, right? So in the act of reaching for the tree, what is she really doing? She's changing the rules. She's saying, I get to be the one who decide. And hence God says, you see, that's why we called the tree what we called it. It's the tree of knowing good and evil. It's the tree of thinking that you get to decide what should be. You just did, right? And hence the name of the tree. That's how the tree gets its name. Okay, so that's stages 1 and 2. All right. So now for the last part of what we're going to do tonight, I want to go to stage 3 in my thinking. So far we're up to 5 years ago, right? In this Aleph Beta video, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Esther and Haman and all of that. Now we leap forward about 4 years to last year, to 2019, where another aspect of this kind of occurred to me. And this is kind of where I'm at now, right? My sort of current way of looking at things. So here's the thing. What's wrong with the theory as we have it with stage 1 and 2? Sounds kind of appealing, right? Is there anything that yet needs to be explained if you accept this theory of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? It's a gift. God loves you. He wants you to have all these trees. He just wants you to stay away from the one tree because that's his tree, because he wants you to understand it's a gift. He doesn't want you to lose sight of invisible grandpa, right? And yet, and you know why it's not the spotted and speckled tree, why it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because when you choose to eat from that tree, you take this godly power of judgment into your hands, and that's not really good for you, right? That's not really good for you. Okay, so what's wrong with that theory? It sounds like a pretty appealing theory. Here's one problem with it. let's get back to the question of why did God put the tree in the garden if he didn't want me to eat from it? We now sort of have an answer to that. We have a better answer that we started with tonight, right? I can tell you, well, God put the tree in the garden. There's a reason. It was a gift of love. He needed a tree that you couldn't eat from in order to ensure that invisible grandpa would be recognized, right? Even after he goes home, right? Okay. But if I was really skeptical, I would still have two problems with this theory. I would say, Fohrman, not sure if I'm buying it. Here's why. A truly loving grandpa, someone who really was just full of love for his kids, I don't know if he'd be so makbid, if he'd be so like, you know what I mean? Like he wants you to say thanks just the right way. You got to remember grandpa even when he's not around. So he leaves this tree behind, which you shouldn't eat from. It's not how grandpas work. Grandpa comes with the battleship. He comes with a full heart. He hopes the kid's going to say thank you. If the kid doesn't say thank you, he doesn't say thank you. I loved you. I gave you the tree. I'm happy enough that you're playing with it. It gives me joy, right? The grandpa who's so curmudgeonly that he, you know what I mean? That I need the tree. I need you to not. It just strikes us as he's a little, where's the love? It's just not. Don't know if I buy that. So that's like one problem here. And right, in other words, to put it another way, it's hard for me to put my finger on this, but there's nothing sort of inherently loving about that restriction, right? And as you'd say, the gift of all the other trees, that's loving, right? But the restriction is not loving. The restriction is just something that has to be in place in order that he doesn't forget, right? But it's not a gift, right? Where do I see grandpa's love in that?
And there's that consequence. The consequence is dire.
Yeah, the consequences are dire. What happens from you eat from it, God gets really mad at you, right? So something still seems a little off. Also, getting back to this question of why did God want you? Why would God put the tree there if he didn't want you to eat from it? There's something still slightly unsatisfying about this answer. The way I would put it to help understand why it's dissatisfying is we have a negative answer to the question, but not a positive answer to the question. Let me explain what I mean by that. I'd say, well, I understand why the tree is there. The tree is there so that it's a tree not to be eaten from. There's this tree that must not be eaten from, like the Voldemort, right? He who must not be named. The tree that must not be eaten from, right? So there's no positive reason for this tree. There's nothing that this tree contributes to the garden. It's a problem, this tree. This tree has no good reason for being, it has nothing to really give in any positive way to the garden, to humanity, to anything. It's a purely bad thing to be there. It's awful. It's nice for God. It's not something that really needs to be there for humans. It's just there as the tree that shouldn't be eaten from, right? So that we can realize that it's God's garden. There's something a little bit, you have to use your thumbs too much for that. You know what I mean? It's clever. It's very clever. Again, Occam's razor, simple, right? You would imagine that everything God created has a positive reason for being there. It feels, and this gets back to an intuition you had before, right? That maybe God sort of wants us to eat from that tree. And I think if I had to psychoanalyze you, where that intuition comes from, is that God doesn't work that way, that he just creates things not to be eaten from. It's like, it's not a loving thing to do. Everything you created has a purpose, not just a not purpose. Do you know what I mean? Not just, there's no such thing that's there not to be touched, right? And think about it, there's this tree, there's all these beautiful fruits. They're supposed to rot, all those fruits, they're supposed to just fall to the ground and rot. Why make these fruits that rot? Like that seems wasteful. Like, aren't you a clever enough God that you could get your desires done without making rotting fruit, right? Something that just goes to waste. if there's fruit, fruit is there to be eaten from. Fruit is there, the tree is there to be consumed from, it sounds like. In which case we're back to that very vexing question. Are you telling me God wants us to eat from the tree? That messes everything up. Then God is this vile God who's like happy that we ate from the tree and gleefully rubbing his hands together as he vanishes. What are we supposed to do with that? Here's the answer. The answer has to do with time. In other words, maybe the answer is, one second, could it be possible that God does want us to eat from the tree, just not yet? That's a very intriguing way of looking at the story. In other words, one of the points I make a lot when I teach Tanakh is that one of the techniques, and you're a Tanakh teacher of your own for many years now, and you can use this with your students, right? One of the, and you probably have, you come across it in my videos, I'm sure. One of the points I like to make a lot is that you can never sort of read the story with the end in mind. The stories that we have in the Torah, we know how they end. And because we know how they end, we have this fake feeling of inevitability, that this is how they had to have ended. Right? But of course, people had free will and they could have chosen to do things differently. And so you always have to ask, well, what would have happened? What might have happened had people chosen differently? Like, that's an interesting thing to ask. And that leads to a very tantalizing question in the story of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is, what if we hadn't eaten from the tree? What would have happened then? Well, presumably we wouldn't have been banished from the garden. Okay. But then what would have happened? Now, here's the really tantalizing possibility. If we had not eaten from the tree, is it possible that over the course of time, God would have chosen to share the tree with us anyway? There's something satisfying about that possibility, because if it's true, it answers for us why the tree was there. The tree was there to be shared. God did want us to eat from the tree, but not yet. Now, we might say, well, what evidence is there for this in the text? And I grant you that there is not a lot of evidence for the text, only our intuition that if God put a tree there, it was a tree there that was meant to be eaten. And we might say that we wouldn't expect to find evidence in the text for such a thing. And therefore, it's not problematic that it's not there, because the reason why there's no evidence for it is because we short-circuited the whole story by eating from the tree too early. So we never got to see God's design. Of course, God would have shared it with us eventually, right? But we never get to see that because tragically we ate from it too soon. The tragedy of the story is not that we ate from the tree, it's that we ate from the tree too soon. Okay, let's just play with this possibility and see where it leads us for a moment. We don't know that it's true, but let's try and see where this logic takes us, right? This notion that maybe we were supposed to eat from this tree, just not yet. The first question you'd have to ask if you were playing with that theory is, okay, so you want to say that maybe we were supposed to eat from the tree, but not yet. I don't get it. Like, if God wants you to eat from the tree, so what's he waiting for? Why can't I eat from the tree now? Why do I have to wait to eat from the tree? What's the idea of that? In order to make sense of that, you have to say that there's almost like two stages in man's development. Stage one in man's development is the stage where you're not supposed to eat from the tree. That's the natural stage one. Only where you go through enough of stage one, that puts you in a position where you can be the kind of being that God would want to share this knowledge with, this knowledge of good and evil, right? Interesting. Okay, so now we have to ask, well then, what exactly was God waiting for? What was supposed to happen through this period of not eating from the tree? And then how is that supposed to change me such that I could be the kind of being that enjoys the knowledge of good and evil? And now we get to use to Occam's razor, another fascinating point, I think. One of the questions I think I asked, I don't know if this was one of my list of questions, but one of the things that I talked about in the book and which I was talking about tonight with you, trying to simplify, is what is the meaning of this tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? What does it mean? When the Rambam has this very complicated theory, right? We simplified the theory somewhat by saying, well, good is just the way things should be, and bad is the way things shouldn't be, right? And these are godly decisions, and they're just decisions of justice and judgment. Can we simplify the theory even more? Make it so simple, right? So very simple, so obvious and intuitive. The most obvious and intuitive way of understanding the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the tree of knowing right and wrong. The tree of knowing what the good thing to do is and what the bad thing to do is, knowing right and wrong. That's the simplest way of understanding it. Now, that comes though with all its whole problems, right? You can say, well, we really didn't know about right and wrong, we didn't know about morality, then we really have no bechira, we have no free choice. How could you have free choice without knowing about morality? I discussed this in the Beast of the Couch of the Door, and therefore discarded this theory. But maybe we shouldn't discard this theory so quickly. Let's go back to the simplest possible understanding of the tree. A tree not just of judgments, of the way things should be and things not should be, but a tree of morality, a tree of knowing the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, a tree of using your mind, knowledge of good and evil to apprehend the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. And now let's get back to the challenge that I issued in the Beast that Crouches at the Door, to that theory. If you think about, right, why would God not want you to be using your mind to think about the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do? And now I want to suggest a surprising and radical theory. Maybe God really didn't want us to think about the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. Not yet. We needed to wait for that. Of course, God wanted us to use our minds to think about the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. Of course, he wanted to share the tree with us. One could even argue that the gift of the Torah was the sharing of the tree at some level. God says, here's my values. Here's the way I see right and wrong. There's a Torah Shebaal Peh, there's a Torah Shebechtav. Participate in it, interpret in it, use your mind to help figure out the implications of these values. We'll become partners in trying to figure out the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. I'll give you the text, you mine it for its wisdom. We're gonna, right? That's when we're eating from the tree, as it were. But something had to happen first. There had to be a period of time where we didn't eat from the tree, which in this new understanding means which we didn't use our minds to try to figure out what right and wrong is. It's almost as if God says, I don't want you using your minds that way. I'm not interested in these cognitive distinctions between the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. I'm just not interested. It's not good for you yet to think in those terms. That's interesting. We need to go through a period of time where it's not good for us to think in those terms in order to prepare for a time when we use our minds to think of those terms. It starts to begin to feel almost like a stage in the maturation of humankind that almost goes from childhood to adulthood. Early childhood, the innocence of the child, the baby, the 4-year-old. 4-year-old kids don't think of right and wrong the way we think of right and wrong. They don't really have those categories. There's a certain kind of innocence and joy and playfulness, right, which kids have before they start using their minds to think of things in moral terms. That's a stage of development. What if there was a stage of development in humankind where before, as a race, we began to use, as a human race, we began to use our minds to cognize good and evil? There was something earlier that we needed to do, which was not cognize good and evil. Not to think in those terms at all. And this gets to a very deep question that, frankly, I evaded for about 45 years of my life, right? And the question is, what is the avoda of childhood? What does it mean to be a child? What are you supposed to work on as a young child? As a father, I confess that I was always waiting for my kids to grow up, right? you have your kids, they're cute, you hold them, whatever, right? But you're really waiting. You can play catch with your kid outside. You're waiting where where you can learn with your kid. You can discover Torah with them. You can cognize. You can talk to them about moral dilemmas. You can, right? The fun part of things is like when you can share all that with your kid, early childhood, whatever. Yeah, you know, they have to nurse, they have to do their various things, right? Like, but what if that's not the way to look at it? What if there's an avoda to being a young child? Like a kid actually needs to work. There's a spiritual avoda of being a little kid. What is the spiritual service of God that a little kid is involved in? What are they supposed to do? What's supposed to be happening in their spiritual development for the first 6 years of their life before they start cognizing good and evil? If we could put our finger on that, it might give us an insight into what we were supposed to be doing at the moment in our human development when we didn't understand, where we weren't supposed to understand good and evil either. There was something God wanted from us. What was it? It all is wrapped up in the verse of the two commands. Mikol etzagan achol tochel, ume'etzadat tovara lo tochel mimanu. That's it. The answer is right there. From all the trees of the garden you shall eat, but from the one tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat from. Those two verses express everything that a child needs in order to grow spiritually as a young child, that young humanity needed to grow spiritually so that they could cognize good and evil. I read a book a while ago called Sapiens by, didn't read the whole thing yet, but by Yuval Noah Harari, a professor at Hebrew University. It's a brief history of humankind. And it's a fascinating book. He's not such a believer, but it's a fascinating look at the development of humanity. And in this book, he argues that there were three great revolutions in human civilization. The earliest revolution was the most profound. The one after that was the second most profound, and the one after that was the third most profound. The third and least profound revolution was the scientific and industrial revolution. It takes place in about 1600 to 1800 or so. That's the least of the profound revolutions. The one before that was more profound and more impactful on human development was actually the agricultural revolution, which happened thousands of years before that, which is the ability of mankind to actually domesticate wheat and domesticate crops. This really transformed us. This actually leads to slavery in Egypt, right? Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. It wasn't a coincidence that was there we became slaves, right? How are you going to work the fields, right? That you need manpower to work the fields. You have this domesticated crop, but you have to till the soil. So the reason why the agricultural revolutions was so profound was because now we could actually have civilization. We can settle down. Before that, we were hunter-gatherers. We were always on the run. We were nomads. But now you can settle down somewhere. You can have a stable source of food. You can build cities. You can have urban life. You can have civilization. You can have development much more profound than the scientific revolution later on. But he argues that before even the agricultural revolution, there was an earlier revolution, which was the most profound revolution in the development of humanity, and he calls it the cognitive revolution. The ability of man to use his mind as a tool. Of course, man is a tool maker. He's a Baal Malacha. He's someone that can actually do things in the world. But the most profound tool that he has, right, is his own mind, out of which he fashions concepts as tools. Think about all the concepts that we use as tools and their incredible power, the things that are only true in our minds. Think about a corporation. What in the world is a corporation? Point to a corporation. There's no such thing as a corporation. It's a fiction of our minds. You agree that there's something called a corporation, and I agree there's something called a, and he agrees, and we all agree there's something. Money. What's money? It's this paper. It has value? No. We ascribe to it value. We say that thing with 100 and Benjamin Franklin on it, that's worth a lot of money. You believe it, I believe it, he believes it. And now it has power because we all, with our minds, ascribe this fictional value to something. And that is this incredible tool which makes possible banking and economics and incredible transfers of wealth. It makes capital, and we could build factories. We can actually do things in the world because of this idea called money. We can do things in this world because of this idea called corporations. There's all these things. There's all these. We can do so much with the ability of our mind to create these ideas that actually transform the world. Right? These that make a real difference in the world. Among the most powerful tools that we have, what is the most powerful tool that we have? The most powerful concept that the human mind is capable of dreaming up, of using as a tool. It's good and evil. It's the most profound and powerful tool. If you can decide that something is good, if you can say that is good and it is the way things should be, and that's bad, and that's the way things shouldn't be, and therefore you should stay away from this and you should embrace that, right? If you have the power to do that, right, there's no greater power in the world than somebody who has the arbiter than say that that's the way that things should be. There's a reason why the greatest temptation of a president is to mess with the traditional independence of the Justice Department, right? The Justice Department is the purveyor of good and evil, right? What's good and what's evil, right? Well, when can I get my hands on that, right? Can I be the one to decide that? There's no greater power than being able to decide that. Am I going to let that just be? Am I going to mess with it, right? That's the great question. The power of deciding good and evil is the most powerful thing that you could ever have. The question is, what do you need to have in order to be able to use that tool wisely? What do you need? What development, what spiritual development has to happen in my persona in order for me to be able to use that tool well, to not corrupt that tool? Because we all know how corrupting that power can be. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. If there's no greater powers like the ring and Lord of the Rings, right? The ability to decide good and evil, right? If there's so much power vested in that, what is the thing that allows us to use that responsibly? That is what God wanted us to learn. And how are we going to learn it? By eating from all the trees that were delicious, the trees that looked beautiful, and by staying away from the one tree. That was going to teach us everything we needed to know. We needed to do that over and over again, day in and day out, until one day God would say, now you're ready. Now I can share with you this incredible tree with so much power, with the Creator's own power, the ability to be a partner with God in deciding what good and evil really is. Right? Come with me and let's decide it together. The way to think about it is there were three things that had to happen, right? We need to eat from all the trees. We need to stay away from the one tree. And we need to do it day in and day out. Those three things. What did those three things give us? One way to think about it is they gave us an understanding of what I might call proto good and evil, right? In other words, before we would actually think conceptually about good and evil, we would think of concepts of good and evil. Before those concepts would mean anything to us, before we could even God says it's even kosher to conceptualize things in those ways. There were building blocks that you needed to put into place so that you could use this tool wisely once you got to thinking about things in terms of good and evil. One building block was eating from all the trees that were delicious to eat and good to look at. The second building block was staying away from the one tree that God said not to eat from. And the third building block was doing that consistently day after day after day after day. Let's describe what each one of those things did for us. We already talked about what I get out of eating from all those delicious trees. If I'm Bobby, right, What do I get out of eating from all those delicious trees? They're delicious. They're beautiful to look at. They're God's candy, right? So what do I get out of eating from them? What is the Creator trying to communicate to me?
Love.
Love. Love is the first building block. I must experience love. I have to. I have to experience the Creator's love. This is the first great building block that every child needs to get. This is the first building block of the spiritual avot of a child. You must experience love. When your Creator nurses you, right, day in and day out, what does the child learn? Mommy actually loves me, right? There's this being there that didn't just give birth to me and leave me on a rock to just see what I can do, but she cares for me. She nurtures me. She actually loves me, right? It's an amazing, amazing thing. She actually loves me. That's the first thing I have to learn. It's the first spiritual avoda of a child. But the avoda of a child is not quite complete with just learning love. A child has to learn one more thing too. That it's okay if there's something I can't have and I don't know why, but the being that I love said that I can't have it. In other words, that the fact that the being that I love said that I can't have that one thing and I don't know why does not in itself make me suspicious of that being and upset my understanding that that being loves me. In other words, if I eat day in and day out from all these trees and I come to understand, that was the second thing, is consistency. It's not just that I got a one-time gift from my Creator. I get a consistent gift day in and day out. My Creator nurses me. Day in and day out, I get to eat from all these trees. And I understand that they're gifts from my Creator. He's giving them to me, right? What do you get from not just love, but the consistent experience of love? When I was a parent, I always used to hear that you need to love your kids and you need to be consistent with your kids. And I was always pretty good at loving my kids, but I always wondered, like, why did I have to do the consistent thing? Like, what did consistency teach? What did that add to the picture? So let me ask you that. What does it add to the picture? Why is it not just enough to love your kid once? Why do you have to love your kid over and over and over, day in and day out? What are you teaching your kid by loving your kid day in and day out, over and over and over in a consistent kind of way? What does he learn?
Trust.
Trust. He can count on that love. It's not just that love is a fly-by-night thing that may or may not happen. It's not a slot machine love. I can count on love. It's always there. I can trust. God is trying to cultivate trust. In a word, the spiritual avoda of a child is to cultivate trust. Trust in a loving parent. That's it. And the final avoda of trust is to learn something about that parent. If they love me day in and day out, and there's all these trees and I can eat from, and there's one tree that I'm not allowed to eat from. Now, God may have his reasons, but they're very sophisticated. You shouldn't be like the Creator to decide that that you're the one to make these judgments, because that's going to be the root of all evil. Because if you think that, you're going to be like Parker on the Monopoly board. But 6-year-old child can't understand that. All 6-year-old child is, you know what? There's one tree that you can't eat from. It's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Do I understand why? No. I just understand my Creator said I'm not supposed to eat from it. Now I have a choice. Do I think he's lying to me? Maybe he's in it for himself, right? But if I've gotten the love consistently, right, and I've gotten the trust, the final sort of test of trust is, will I accept this command? Will I believe that it's okay for there to be something I can't have in the world from my Creator, at the hand of my Creator saying no, and that's okay. And I don't know why, and that's okay. And I'm not supposed to know why, and it's still okay. And I still believe he loves me. Then I trust. These are the 3 aspects of proto-love that a child must learn. And once he learns that, he's ready to grow up. Now he's ready for the ring of power. Now he's ready for the greatest gift of all, the ability to become a partner with his creator in cognizing good and evil, to use his mind, the greatest power, the tool that he will ever have, to think about the most powerful things in the world, the concepts of what is right and what is wrong. Why do you need trust in a loving God or in a loving parent before I can start thinking of good and evil? In order to understand that, just think about the converse. What if I haven't yet developed that trust and I eat from the tree? What if I haven't come to believe that there is a loving God yet who really, really loves me consistently in a way that I can count on, and that it's okay if they don't say, even if he says no? What if I don't yet really believe that? I don't really trust that that's true. I'm not really sure that there's anybody who loves me out there. And then I start thinking about good and evil. You see, here's the problem. One of the things that I talked about in The Beast That Crouches at the Door is that the words good and evil are slippery. They have two meanings. There's good and evil in the sense of that which is right and that which is wrong. And there's good and evil in the sense of that which I like and that which I don't like, right? I like the broccoli. I think it's good. I like the macaroni and cheese. I think it's good. I don't like the broccoli. I think it's bad. I'm using my subjective judgments to say what I like, what I think is good, and what I don't like. And one of the ways that we bring terrible corruption and evil to the world is we start confusing these two understandings of good and evil. We start to not be quite sure about the difference between what's morally good and praiseworthy, right? And what's just what I like, right? And how do I ever know? And the reason why I don't leave that note once I back into the Jaguar is because I've confused, right, what I like, which is keeping my money and not leaving the note, with what's morally just, what's morally virtuous. What causes us to confuse it? Let's get to that question. Why do human beings get so tripped up? What causes us to confuse? What causes us to always mess up and to start thinking that what I like is synonymous with what should be? Why is it that you don't want to give a child who hasn't yet come to trust their creator the ability to start thinking of what's virtuous or what's not virtuous, of that power, right? If I don't, the answer is, if I don't think that there's a being there who loves me and who's going to care for me and who's going to take care of my basic needs in the world, if there's no creator to do that, I'm not really sure the world is a good place. The world is this scary place where you get deposited and no one really loves you or cares for you. Then whose job is it to take care of me? Whose job is it to fill my needs in a world where I can't be sure of love?
Mine.
It's mine. It's my job. If it's my job, it's my job to look out for number one, because no one else will. And therefore I have no choice but to use every tool at my disposal to make sure that my needs are met. And what's the greatest tool I have at my disposal? The ability to decide good and evil. And all I have to do is one little sleight of hand. All I have to do is to confuse what's morally good with what I want, and I can have everything. I can become the great arbiter of what's good. I can hide behind it. I can have everything because of course it's virtuous that I should have. What, of course? About what, you would deny me that? And then I make all these rationalizations and then I can have it, right? Because who's going to take care of me if not me? That is what leads to the corruption. God says, I can't have you thinking in moral terms yet until you have absorbed proto-morality, the basic building blocks of morality. You have to understand that somebody loves you in the world. Your creator loves you. You can depend on that love day in and day out. There's all these trees. They're there just for you. They're delicious. They're beautiful to look at. Do you get the love that's there for you? And I want you to experience it every single day. Then you can understand that it's okay if there's something you don't like in the world. You can accept those restrictions. You can really trust me. You can trust me even when the gift isn't there once. Even if there's one thing that you can't have, you can say, I still think the world is a good place, right? Okay, so now you can maybe use your head to make those judgments with some degree of objectivity. You can actually be trusted in turn. I can trust you to start thinking about good and evil without corrupting it, because you need to make it work out for you. Relax, it's going to be okay. You're loved. It's going to be fine, right? That was the avoda of childhood. That was the avoda of early man. We're kind of almost out of time. I sort of promised that I would go for about an hour and a half and not much longer. So let me just take this into our final moments here with you and then fill this through. What happened? What went wrong? What went wrong in the garden is this. We talked earlier about the tree of knowledge of good and evil being this din-like thing, this judgment type thing, being associated with the judgment name of God, right? This evaluative piece, what's good and what's evil. It's this powerful thing. It's this tool of creativity. The great, powerful creator, Elohim, here's how he makes, the greatest way he makes creations. He has this ability to decide what should exist, what shouldn't exist. That's this godly thing. Interestingly, though, when mankind has the experience of being in the garden, he's no longer in the world of Elohim, God the judge. He's in the world of Hashem Elohim, God the judge, who's also the one who loves us. That's the whole point of the garden. God brings us into this world of trees and says, here's all these gifts. I love you. There's more to me than judgment. Don't you get that? That was the whole point of the garden, to understand that God loves us. We're right here with him. We can be intimate with him. We can eat from all the trees. God isn't just the God of justice. But God puts one little tree in the corner and says, that's my tree of justice over there. That's the tree of good and evil. One day you can have it, right? Maybe we can talk about that. But now all you need to know is that's off limits for now, right? Stay away from that tree. For the meantime, forget about the justice thing. Just experience my love, right? Experience this overwhelming love that I'm giving you. All these trees, with this one little taste of this tree that you can't have. That's what I need you to experience. But along comes the snake. And the snake is very crafty. And the snake is very sly. And among the most devious things the snake does is that he lies to mankind about God's name. You see, in the entire chapter 2, the story of man in the garden, God is always described as Hashem Elohim, not just the God of justice, but also the God of love. But when the snake speaks his temptation to Eve, the text says, right? And says to the woman, Af ki amar Elokim lo tochlu mikol etz hagan. Did God really say, don't eat from all the trees of the garden? Now that's puzzling on many fronts. It's puzzling because God didn't say don't eat from all the trees of the garden. What's the snake saying that he did, right? Don't eat from all the trees of the garden. Okay. But it's not just puzzling because of that. It's puzzling also because we're using the wrong name of God. The snake's using the wrong name of God. God wasn't Elohim. God was Hashem Elohim. He's not just the God of justice. He's the God of justice who loves us. What the snake is really saying is, Af ki amar Elohim, lo tochlu mikol etz hagan. Af, even if God said, or what if God said, don't eat from all the trees of the garden, which is a way of saying, what if God isn't the God of justice and love? What if he's only Elohim? What if he's only the God of justice? What if love isn't one of his fundamental values? What if he's just this creator that works with power? What if the only thing you can trust about him is that he's powerful? What if the only reason to worship him is because he's powerful and because he's just and because he has this evaluative capacity? He's the bearer of this great tool called good and evil. What if that's the reason why you worship him, but not because he loves you? And this is the great question that every religion has to grapple with. Why do we worship God? There is a vision in which we worship God because God is the God of justice and God is the God of vengeance and God has a lot of power and he's going to throw us in hell if we don't listen to him. And he's the one with all this power and boy, you better listen. Otherwise, who knows what's going to happen to you? But that's a very thin reed upon which to base a religion. There is no love in that picture, right? And the snake says, maybe that's God. Maybe God is God. And if God is that, then human beings, how should you interpret your situation here? I know that God said you could eat from all these trees, but he also said that there's one tree that you're not supposed to eat from. Why do you think you think he loves you? Why did he put that tree off limits? Huh? Well, why did he put that tree off limits? If he really loved you, wouldn't he give you all the trees? Keeping one for himself, huh? You know why? Because his only value is power. He wants to keep that tree for himself. He wants to keep that. He doesn't want to share that one tree with you. That's his source of power, that ability to declare good and evil. That's his. He doesn't want that for you. As a matter of fact, do you think there's all these trees that you can have? Yeah, that's for now. But you see, you're playing capture the flag with him. There's your part of the field and there's his part of the field. And right now you got all those trees, but he's only got that one really powerful one. Soon enough, he's going to start making your trees off limits. What if one day you wake up and he says, don't eat from any trees of the garden? Then what? Now you're really up the creek without a paddle, right? What are you going to do? Don't you think maybe you should make a preemptive strike? Eat from that tree, the powerful one? The one that's the source of all his power? Don't you think you should take what you get while the getting's good? You can just eat from it if you want. You don't have to leave to him the right to decide what the way things should be, the way things shouldn't be. You can decide the way. Why don't you go eat from the tree? You're going to trust him? You're going to trust the guy? It's all about power. You don't trust someone who's all about power. This is the fundamental challenge of the snake. Now, the reason why the snake's challenge is so tempting is because the snake does something very sly. The real deceitful thing of the snake is he sort of wraps his arm around you and says, hey, buddy, hey, pal, let me tell you something about the way the world works. I'm your friend. You're a little naive around here. You're just a newcomer to this garden. Let me explain to you the way things work here in this garden. And in putting his arm around you and describing, palling around with you and describing, let me give you some advice, right? You really think you should leave that to him? The snake is making out to be your friend. He's pretending to love you. Love. Even as he is denying the love of God and saying that the only thing that motivates God is power, he's pretending to love you. As a matter of fact, he might sort of love you. One of the arguments I made in The Beast That Crouches at the Door is that the snake might have actually been attracted to you. There might have been this attraction between the animal world and the human world, a love kind of relationship. There might have even been something genuine about that love, something about the animal world that wanted to be connected to man. But it came with a price tag. I need you to be just like me. I need you to be someone who worships power. Interestingly, the animal world does worship power. Darwin said it. Survival of the fittest is the law of the jungle, right? To be an animal is to believe in survival of the fittest. Why don't you be an animal? Just like me. Power is the only thing that makes a difference in the world. God himself is all about power. That's why we worship him. We express that power. The ones who survive love is for sissies. Let me teach you a thing or two, pal, right? And what happens is this. The snake is the ultimate con man. Think about what a con is, right? The way a con works is that I pretend to like you, right? I pretend to be your friend, and I give you, but I'm not really your friend. I give you bad advice. One of the great mistakes that we all make as human beings is that we all believe that we're smart enough to detect the con men in our lives. We think we'll see fake love when we see it. We know that we'll recognize fake love when we see it. No, I know. I can tell when someone's sincere, when someone really loving me, and when someone's really just using me. We all think we can. We all think we have the nose to smell fake love. Unfortunately, we're all a lot worse at it than we really think. It's very easy to get snookered by fake love, and there's a reason for it. The reason why we think we're so good at detecting fake love is because we all know fakes from the real thing, right? I mean, I know the difference between a rose and a fake rose. I should know the difference between love and fake love. But with love, it's a lot harder. Here's why. Because if the con man was just pretending to like you, it would be easy to detect. But what if they aren't pretending? What if they really do like you? Just that they'll use the love as a means to power. That's where the con man becomes very hard to detect. What do you mean he loves me? I know he loves me. He feels affectionate towards me. He's my brother, takes care of me. It's true. They really do love you. The question that needs to be asked about love is this. Love, in order to really be love, needs to be sacrosanct. It needs to be an end in and of itself. It cannot be sacrificed for everything else. If you truly love someone, it's not, love means not just feeling affection for someone. Love means that I will put their interests first. It means that I love them, that even if I need to let go of them, if that was the right thing for them, I would love them. That love is an end in and of itself. It is never a means to something else. It is never a means to my own power. That is where the con man fails. The con man loves you. The con man feels affection towards you, but they're always willing to sacrifice that for power. The snake might really feel, you know what, human beings, I'm wrapping my arm around you. Let me tell you about the law of the jungle. You're new here. I'll tell you about it. There is some connection between man and animal, but the snake ultimately is using that for its own power, is advancing power as an ideal. There is a price tag to that love, and therefore the love isn't genuine. And that is the great tragedy. What God is trying to teach man is actually the truth that genuine love exists in the world. I actually just love you. I'm grandpa. I really love you. I just want to see you play with these trees. I just want to see you. It gives me such pleasure to see you eat from these trees and to enjoy them because I can't, there's nothing better than that, right? And I need you to understand that I love you. And I need you to understand that love is consistently there, that I will never sacrifice love for you. And I need you to understand that you can trust in my love. And even if you don't see it one day, it's not because it isn't there. It's still there. It's just you can't understand yet. You can, in a deep kind of way, at the very beginning of the Torah, God was preparing us for tzaddik v'ra'lo, right? For the notion that bad things can sometimes happen to good people and you don't know why, but that's the way it is. Sometimes you just don't know why. Sometimes there's something you can't understand, but it's okay. Do you know there's a loving God? You do. So you don't understand. Okay, maybe one day, right? I'm preparing you for that. You must understand that God's love is real. The snake challenges that. The snake takes us before we have learned the lesson of trust and challenges trust and says, Af ki amar Elokim lo tachlu mikol eitz hagan. What if one day God would say, you're not gonna have any trees? What if he just wants power? What if he would vanquish you? What if the love isn't the main idea of God? The main idea is his Elohim side. Power is what makes for everything. And of course, the snake is the one who idolizes power, not God. The snake is lying about God and is projecting to God, on God, who he is, right? He's the one who idolizes power, right? And he's saying, what if God is just like me, right? And ultimately, our downfall is that we ate from the tree. And in eating from the tree, the great tragedy is we came to understand God that way. We came to understand God as a God that thinks power is the main thing in the world and that love can't really be trusted. And therefore, When Vayishmu et kol Hashem Elokim mitalech bagan l'ruach hayom, when Adam and Eve hear God, the voice of God strolling through the garden in the afternoon, after they've sinned, right? What's their response? You see, if God is the God of love, why was God strolling through the garden in the afternoon? He said, Ayeka, where are you? Ayeka, as I argued in the beast of the crouch of the door, is mournful. Where did you go? We were supposed to go walking together. I have my jogging shoes on, right? Where are you? I love you. I wanted to go walking with you. Now, God is omniscient. He knows they've sinned. I still want to go walking with you. That's strange. But what does Adam and Eve immediately assume? Why are they hiding? Because they don't see God that way. They can't see God for who he truly is. They think God is the God of justice and justice only, and love isn't really real. So why would the God of justice be walking through the garden when they've sinned? To play gotcha, right? Because he's going to come with his long beard and his javelins and throw punishment, right? That's why, right? And it's like God is like, no, let's talk. Let's have a little talk. Let me put my arm around you. Why'd you eat from that tree? Right? Like, what, you think the only thing that makes me great is power? That's what you want, my power? There's more to life than that. Let's talk about it, right? Instead, not only God comes and says, so did you maybe eat from this tree, right? And what happens? What happens is immediately these power plays in the garden, power plays between two people who should love each other, Adam and Eve, the first two people who should be in love, have suddenly learned that love can't be trusted. And when asked, Adam says, yeah, she gave it to me. And you know what? She's at fault. Not only is it she at fault, but you're at fault, God, because you gave me her, right? And it's like, and I throw everybody under the bus. And all of a sudden the power plays multiply, and power enters into loving relationships. And the relationship between Adam and Eve begins to disintegrate in the garden. I'll just conclude with the notion that we talked about aram, nakedness. If you think about nakedness or the intimacy of nakedness as the symbol of the connectedness, the sexual connectivity of lovers in a garden, as the emblem of love, of coming together. So the way life is supposed to be in a perfect world is that, right, is that the intimacy of coming together is natural, right? And yet there are two feelings that can attend to it, and it's embarrassment on the one hand, or shame, and the other feeling is fear and shame. And we asked before, what do fear and shame have to do with each other? And if you think about it, right, Adam and Eve were fearful and presumably ashamed. What's those connections between fear and shame? Think about it this way. If you were in love and you started to use love wrong, you started to not understand that love could be trusted, and you were the victim of a con, and you started to use power in love relationships because that's what was done to you, how would you feel? How would you feel if you were the aggressor in a love relationship using power upon someone who loved you? And how would you feel if you were the victim in a love relationship? You really loved somebody, but they surreptitiously, they loved you, but the love came at a price. They used power against you. How would you feel? If you were the victim, if you knew that in love, you could have power used against you, how would you feel as you got close to being very, very intimate, very loving towards someone, but you knew that there was the possibility that you couldn't trust them, that they could use their might against you? How would you feel?
Fear.
You'd feel afraid. That's if you're the victim. Let's switch shoes. You're the aggressor. You're the aggressor, and you're contemplating using your power against this someone who's coming to you in love and wants to connect to you, and you kind of like them too. But you can use that as bait for your power to get somewhere. Now, as you're contemplating that, as you do that, how do you feel?
Shame.
Shame. shame and fear are the two flip sides to using power in love, right? Power in love is the great evil, right? That is the legacy of eating from the tree, the legacy of the snake, of eating from the tree before its time, of understanding.
I'm gonna just jump in only because I just got a message that it's about to
Time is up.
end,
Yeah.
that somehow it's going to end. I want to
that's
thank
it.
you before it ends. I just wanted to thank you. This was a treasure. And once again, this is in memory of Rachel Bas Simcha, Roberta Bunny Oberlander, and it should be a merit for her family. And I cannot thank you enough. This was magical. It was absolutely magical.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Karsh, for hanging out with me. We should do this more often.
I agree. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Be well.
Good night.
Be
Bye-bye.
well.